welcome again. I want to thank you all for coming. I wanted to find out who all was here to get a little bit of an idea of sort of the reach of the community, and I'm really excited to see so many different groups represented. As John said, I'm Leslie Johnson. I'm with the Windows Security Group, and I'm with the System Integrity Group inside the Windows Security Group. We're the group that does BitLocker and now crypto. And woo, privacy lady is thrilled about that. And my co-presenter is Karl Bystrom. He's the other usability engineer with Windows Security. And Karl has very graciously consented to help me out. And Carrie helped us out a lot as well. Carrie is a product designer with the Windows Security Group. And Winston, who's listed as a presenter on the abstract, he helped us to create the deck. He got completely overloaded, as happens, and so he's not going to be joining us today. What we'd like to talk about today, first of all, there we go. As I say, thanks for coming. Today is a day where we're going to ask you for your feedback. We're going to take a little bit of a different look at an old problem, and we're going to see if maybe there's a slightly shifted way of looking at it so that we can come up with at least the beginnings of a solution. And a lot of what you're going to hear today is not going to be news. A lot of what you're going to hear today is stuff that you already know. If I'm boring you, if you fall asleep, I'll catch you. I will. Other than that, please bear with me if it's stuff that you already know. I'm hoping that once we get to some of the sort of working bits, the inside the gears bits, that it'll start to become new. What we'd like to talk about today. So we're basing this on a couple of security dilemmas that you guys already know a lot about. One of them is the "but how do we manage this" dilemma. And that's been the topic of a lot of conversations recently with John and Josh and a number of different groups. It's come up over and over and over again. There's another one, oh hi, there's another one that's not quite as obvious, but is there nonetheless, and that's the dilemma that says that IT people keep getting asked to do more and more and more, and so they end up, in order to do more, they end up pushing down things into the user community who can't handle it. And so that's as big an issue because you end up with lower security because they don't know what they're doing. We're going to give you a little bit of background. There's a little bit, like I say, there's a little bit of stuff that you probably already know, so bear with us on that. And then what we're going to do is show you an example of how it doesn't work well. And then hopefully we're going to start showing you how we think it could work well. And what we'd like to do is to have you kind of go through a little bit with us so that we can get your feedback in a way that says, you know, could this work at Microsoft or not? So Microsoft is a software company. We see a problem, we build a solution. It's what we're good at, right? We do a really good job at it. We see a security problem, we build a security solution. Sometimes we even do it backwards, where we've got a really great, cool new technology, and we look for a problem to fit the solution. So what ends up happening is that we get an encryption problem, and so we build a few solutions for it. We get an identity management problem. We build a few solutions. And on it goes. And these are all great solutions. They don't work well together. They don't work in the same environments in many cases. And so we end up with this problem that we had talked about how do you manage all of this stuff? If you're in an integrated corporation, how do you deal with this issue that I don't know what my security actually looks like because I can't get a real picture of it? Well, given that we're Microsoft and we build solutions when we see a problem, we figured that maybe we can put like this magic UI layer on top of it that will just sort of somehow solve all of this. And the magic UI layer, that isn't necessarily the wrong solution. What ends up happening, though, is that it's a hard one. People end up polarizing, right? There are some people who say, I know the solution, it's the perfect solution, everybody needs to do it my way. If you're not doing it my way, I'm sorry, you're out to lunch. Then there's the other group who say, I see the scope of the problem and I'm not sure where to start. So that's one of the dilemmas that we're looking at now. And like I say, this isn't news. You guys know this already. Then, as I mentioned before, there's the return on investment solution. That's about integration and IT management being more and more constrained and pushing tasks down into the user workspace. If you have any questions, feel free to, I saw you giving me the squinty.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that point? I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by it.
So what happens here is that in any organization, right, IT is a sinkhole for money. And so the organization tries to make them more profitable by trimming the IT budget, which means trimming staff, but they still have the same set of responsibilities. So anything that can't be scripted or somehow automated, they'll push as much as they can back down into their knowledge worker space and ask them to just take those tasks on. And the knowledge workers are often completely unprepared for it. They don't have a clue.
Can you give an example in security?
Sure. So this actually relates to the example that we're going to talk about a little bit later. EFS, encryption file service, encrypted file services. Thank you. Encrypted file systems. There's a rekeying technology that it has in there that asks users to make decisions that knowledge workers can't make, IT people can make. What we've seen is that has been pushed back down into the knowledge worker space. So that's one little example of that. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay. Okay. So when we have a technology-centered solution, you can see that it leads to some of these things that we've just talked about. And as an example, think about Office before it was Office, right? Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things were good in and of themselves. Users came back with these massive sets of requests that said, make this work together so that I can use it in the office in a rational way, in a way that fits the way I work. And so that's what ended up happening with Office. They integrated based on that. So what we're proposing is that this be a little bit of a different, we take a little bit of a different look at it. Step back from the UI approach, step back from the solution approach for a minute, and think about it from the same approach that the Office people started to think about it, which is more of a workflow approach. What do the users actually do? What do they care about? When do they use this? All of that kind of thing. Again, this is probably not news to you guys. This is probably stuff you already know. Historically, Microsoft hasn't been great at this because we're really, really good at building solutions. There have been a few exceptions like Office. Security is a space where we're particularly at a great point right now because we could start to think about that level of integration now. One of the things about integrating that in a workflow space is that you have to understand the workflow and you have to understand the users. Carl's going to talk a little bit about the workflow. I'd like to talk to you real briefly about personas. Has anybody here not used personas? Yeah. And personas at Microsoft are actually pretty good. They're based on real data. They meet most of the needs that we have. And what they do is they help us build products that are more focused. We've got some examples here that are pretty straightforward. I'm sure that most of you know these examples already. A consumer, a knowledge worker, and a couple of server or IT guys. And one of the things that I'd like to point out is that people have a tendency to think of personas as being, they know this much, when really it's more of a case of they're on a grid, right? They're on an XY grid that's about interest and expertise. So Abby, for example, when she thinks about security, she has no expertise, she has no interest, she just wants to keep stuff safe. Nicholas, who's the knowledge worker, is really into that. Security isn't his job, but he's excited about it. Server guys just care about their servers. And we've got our IT security manager who thinks that security, of course, is really important, but he feels that his company really doesn't care as much as it should, and that the company makes decisions that are based on, like, they water the security down with business decisions. And so the personas, when they play into a technically based or a technology-based solution, personas sometimes get shoved into a round hole, whether they're a round peg or not. And what can end up happening is that there's a mismatch between the technology and the solution. Again, none of this is news. So we'd like to talk about EFS. EFS is an example of a solution that went in search of a problem And in this particular case, there was a group that somehow decided that we had to have a consumer scenario. And so they actually identified Abby as a primary user of EFS. Not the only user, but one of the primary users of EFS. So when we start thinking about Abby, right, when you're thinking about personas and solutions, you think about their goals, you think about what triggers they use to choose to use the product, task scenarios, that kind of thing. And then you start looking at EFS. And as you can see, as we start to kind of walk through it, it doesn't work very well. Right? If you're a technology off in search of a solution and you force the solution into a persona space that doesn't make sense, then you end up in a very strange place where, I mean, Abby would never be here. Not in a million years. And, yeah. And so, you know, there are just many, many, many things about this that don't work for Abby at all. Yeah. There's a lot of issues here. And so the summary, of course, is that Abby isn't the right person. It doesn't solve her goal. The goal is mismatched to the product and the solution. And it may have been a good idea for the EFS team to step back a little bit and take a look at where encryption really makes sense instead of trying to force it into a solution that doesn't make sense. So, yeah.
The fact that Abby isn't happy with all of this doesn't say anything, does it, about whether encryption is or is not the solution to her problem, right? It's obviously not the entire solution, but it may be the case that there's somebody who really, really needs encryption all the time, EFS style, but as currently constituted, EFS is not the solution to their problem because it doesn't work well with the way they work, and so you have to figure out how to use the same technology in a different way. I mean,
right. That's exactly the point, actually, is that if you step back, right, and it could very well be that the biggest issue here, and I'm guessing here because we haven't actually done the analysis on it, it could very well be that the biggest issue isn't so much the encryption issue, but where it's triggered from and how she has to deal with it.
Right.
So it could be that, you know, we have to step away and think about what's she doing when she needs to do this, rather than, oh, no, she needs encryption, therefore we're just going to push her into this.
So you are a product.
It's not either.
We might ask mine with Outlook for it's way too hard to use. Like, nobody uses it, consumers.
So what was
That's mine.
That's mine with Outlook. Too hard.
So when you're
It's
looking
pretty
at a
easy
problem
now,
like
though.
this, when do you make a decision about how the market is actually, they chose the wrong market? Because EFS actually, 7 years ago,
That's mine.
the financial industry was asking Microsoft as well as Sun and a bunch of vendors that they wanted this for enterprises.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it was really a kick having Microsoft salespeople come to JP Morgan and to the other banks on Wall Street and say, we'll use EFS. It's like, and you manage it how for an enterprise of 300,000 people?
Yeah.
Oh, you don't. Each individual at the desk is going to try and figure out how to do that. That's good.
Yeah. So the answer to the question is before you start building it. Yeah.
I think to the square peg and round hole point, though, right, is the threat model for this is a physical attack that we discovered with EFS, and now we do BitLocker.
Yeah.
For mobile computers. Now, Abby's desktop computer with tax information does not solve her goal. So
Right.
You get this elaborate UI to make the square peg fit the round hole and really not solve the problem.
You're right. You're right.
But back to, so my question though is, when you go through scenarios, are you going to have is there a way of very easily having a questionnaire or 3 questions you're asking that says, you know what, we have good technology, but we're in the wrong market. We need to be in a different market.
I couldn't have asked for a better segue into the next section if I had tried. Thank you. I'll pay you later. Yeah. So.
What I want to point out is that there's a little bit of technology involved with EFS, right?
Yeah.
So what's missing is a whole infrastructure which allows an enterprise to manage it.
That's part of what's missing, right? That's not the only thing, but that's part of it. Yeah.
That infrastructure is not, in fact, the responsibility of the people that actually did the technology for EFS. They could not, in fact, create and build the infrastructure
But
required.
this isn't an enterprise scenario, John. She can back her teeth
No,
up
no,
to a
no,
lobby.
no, 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 no. I know this is not an enterprise scenario, but Ellen pointed out that it was designed initially for an enterprise scenario.
No, I didn't say it was designed initially for it. It was designed, God knows why. But the sales staff decided to tell the rest of the enterprise world that it was for the enterprise.
Just
So we all
because
kind
it's
of
very
looked
cool.
at it and said, I don't
It
think
was
so.
not to enterprise.
Don't get angry.
And by the way, if it is for the consumer, it becomes essentially a live issue. How does live manage habits, the encrypted password?
Maybe it does. And I mean, that's one of the points that we're trying to kind of put forward, is that it could very well be, and it could very well be an infrastructure issue. And it could, there are lots of other potential answers, right? Until we kind of step back and we do an analysis, we don't know.
Okay.
You know, you could very well be right, but what if you're not?
Well, I've never been wrong before.
Oh, well, okay. Okay, we should all be paying him then. So the point is, though, that if we step back away from the technology, away from the solution, and we look at the workflow that needs this solution or that needs a solution like this, we may find that there are other issues that pop up. And so that's actually what Carl's going to talk a little bit about.
Can we derive a rule here that says the more UI you throw, the less efficient your infrastructure is?
You can derive whatever you want.
Okay, so why don't we take a look at one alternative method that we might use to take a look at how users go about using technology to solve their problems. So we've seen how we've done it historically in a kind of solution and problem-based approach. But what if we kind of step back a little bit, like Leslie said, and take a look at the overall end-to-end process? So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about kind of a brief introduction to workflow analysis and modeling. Some of you, again, may have seen this. You may have seen similar terms used in terms of user-centered design methodology. There's different flavors that all kind of get at the same thing in just in slightly different ways. So there's workflows, there's use cases, there's scenarios, there's stories. They're all kind of various ways of looking at and modeling user tasks and user goals. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're looking at workflow modeling is it's mapping the end-to-end experience as opposed to going off on a problem-per-problem experience.
Sorry to interrupt. This raises a big question in my mind.
Yes.
Right. You're doing this analysis for some technology space. I don't know what exactly the space is you're looking at, what the boundaries for that space are. But does every development organization require a group that can do this?
Yes, hire us and pay us lots of money. I'm kidding, sorry.
Yeah. I would not necessarily say that we're doing it on a technology space. We want to do it on a problem space.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we look at a mid-level market IT management space, what are the issues with that? That's sort of the technology agnostic, but the basic problems are there. And then there are similar issues in the smaller markets and the larger markets. There are all kind of similar issues with how do you go about managing your systems, but the way they go about it differs. So to answer your question of whether every different organization needs to do this, at some point I would say yes, they do.
That sounds like a scaling point.
Yes.
How do you find all the right people to do this?
Pay us lots of money.
Well, the other thing is, just from a practical perspective, the other thing is that once you've gotten some sort of a critical mass of this work that's been done, there is, of course, the potential to start puzzling things together and building pieces that you need and doing a gap analysis rather than doing the whole thing all at once.
So for example, there are different organizations across Microsoft that have done a lot of research in the field and generated a lot of different personas and so forth. So the Windows Server organization has their own set of personas. The Longhorn organization has their own set of personas. The developer organization has their own set of personas. They each serve their specific purpose, but they can also be leveraged, by other organizations. So it's not an optimal solution, but it can be done.
Still very much a silo problem.
Yes. Welcome to Microsoft.
Yes.
I want to emphasize that the mapping of the end-to-end experience appears both inside and outside the technology-based approach. Again, because we're Microsoft, we're really good at looking at pixels on screen. But there's a lot that happens in the user space that happens outside of that. For example, user education, marketing, things like that. Those all play into how the user goes about performing their tasks, but they're not pure technology, which is where we tend to live. Yes?
Is it fair to say that the essence of this discussion is to say that problems should be looked at holistically?
Absolutely.
It isn't enough to build a great engine, you gotta think about the layout of the console when you're building a car and so forth.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you've got the wrong audience here. Most of the people are engine designers here,
Yes.
I think. This is a case for senior management. This is a pitch to take to senior management and say, there isn't a feature until it's been thought through holistically, which includes the engine, the console, the chassis, the upholstery, the paint,
Yeah, absolutely.
In a sense, that's what I was trying to say as well.
Yeah.
And senior management must recognise this, and
Right.
therefore staff the organisation appropriately to do it.
Until then, what benefit from getting this bee stuck in our bonnet?
Oh, no,
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm not-
I am
absolutely.
so glad that you brought that up, actually, because on the one hand, you're absolutely right. I mean, I would argue that this isn't the only audience for this, but this is a very influential audience. This is a group of people who have
we like to believe that anyway.
well, I see what happens
Vastly
day to day.
disabused.
Okay. Yeah, bear in mind that, yes, this is absolutely something that senior management has to buy into. However, you guys are also very influential, like Leslie said, and the stuff that you do touches everything else. So what we want to do is kind of like get you folks bought into this, frankly. So you can, carry the torch and say, yea, verily, we shall, I try to, use a better methodology. It's kind of what it boils down to.
Actually, in the security space, there's something that's very closely analogous to what you're talking about, which we just basically become aware of only the last fairly recently. And there's what we call them ceremonies.
Okay.
The awareness that users have to participate in security protocols. It's not just bits across the wire.
Yeah.
It's users using those bits across the
Yes.
wire. And the user's involvement in those protocols is crucially important
Yes.
in making them secure.
Yeah, and again, this is completely outside the technology space where we tend to focus. Yes?
So far, what I've heard though is there's nothing specific to security. I mean, if I take the principles that you have here, I would apply, or I would hope or apply to designing any feature.
Absolutely, yes.
Irrespective of security or not. So, in so as far as that did not happen in the EFS case, it's hard for me to, I guess I don't know what the...
Why do you care?
Well, no, I'm not sure what my takeaway is.
Okay.
So, great, I get that this is how you should do it, fine, but...
Okay. Bear in mind that security has significant implications. I mean, if the user screws up EFS, they lose their data. I mean, if other security stuff gets messed up, they lose their data. So,
When they lose their data, they're under regulatory compliance issues, and there you are.
right. So we need to be very concerned about how best to build solutions so users don't lose their data and so forth. Which means that, yes, this is absolutely a kind of generic methodology that can be used to design any particular product. But in the spaces that we live in, it's really important. Yes.
You said that then for just about any of the things that are around pervasive feature set, so just security, performance, scalability, availability, all those goodness and mom apple pie things that we all love so much. So you're saying that end-to-end workflow analysis and modeling is actually crucial for those things that are highly distributed, that run basically through the OS and the distributed systems at large. Is that what you're saying, really?
I would,
I don't buy
Kind
it makes you security better.
yeah. So,
Well, so far we haven't really addressed the human equation, the human problem in the security equation, right? We're able to secure things from a technology standpoint, but we haven't addressed the human hole, right? The problem that human errors cause security data loss, cause security holes. This is a method to get us to start thinking about how humans fit into the end-to-end experience with the technology itself. So far we go and we create something like this, and then we say, if person ends up in the appropriate situation where this is applicable, this will solve the problem. But we haven't said what's really the problem space that we're solving.
yeah. Go ahead.
I think, the key point, and you touched on it, Winston, and John as well, is that until very recently, the assumption has been in the security space that it should be transparent to the user. The user shouldn't know about or care about security, and that it should all just happen magically under the covers. And finally, some people, unfortunately not everybody, but some people are starting to realize that yes, the user is crucially involved in this process, and therefore that this aspect of design of security products and
I
security
think
features.
it's a dumb statement, Dan. I don't think everyone believes that.
Huge.
No offense, but I really do believe that most people think security mechanisms and their technology and exactly how they work might need to be transparent, but that the user at the end of the day has to click the seatbelt. The user at the end of the day has to put the token, or they have to participate somehow.
You can't just make that's exactly what I'm saying. However, there are a lot of
Most
people.
people know that.
No, there are people who definitely believe that the user should not be involved. The user will screw up if you give the user the chance, and therefore we should design the security so that the user never has the opportunity to screw up.
Okay,
It's-
I think I know the meetings you've been in that have beaten you down like that. Sorry.
Unfortunately,
Point well taken, yeah.
we seem to go the other way. When they actually put the seatbelt on, they actually have to build the engine too. So we seem to go the opposite way. We end up making them do too much.
Well,
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, like it's on the EFS example, we expose a lot of seams in the user interface and a lot of seams and hoops that the user has to jump through.
I have a question in workflow analysis though. For specifically for ITs, we're seeing them wanting to have dedicated or compartmentalized roles. That the junior admin can't see potentially somebody's data, subjects of their data, whatever.
Right.
And as you go up the chain, they see more and more and they get more control.
Yes.
All the way to two forms off capabilities for administration capability. Trying to do this as a workflow analysis, you're only picking a small slice in a vertical tower.
Okay, bear in mind that in situations like that, there's actually different workflows. So, the lower level admin who is, very role-based has a certain, set of workflows that he or she goes through. The higher level admin has, certain levels of workflows that he or she goes through, and so forth. So I am not saying that, there is one, uber workflow analysis by any means.
We've tried it. The problem that we
Yeah.
run is every corporation or vertical, group of people that we talk to slices it like this.
Yeah.
And one group may not allow your email admins to control your AD. The other one is it's all in one. And all of a sudden you end up with, okay, I can't make any progress.
Yeah, so I've been through that myself, trust me. And this is situations where we end up seeing if we can, have extract sort of like, generic workflows, provide templates that, individual customers can customize, things like that. It's not a great solution. It seems to work, but yeah, this is one of the things that's just a tough problem.
Sometimes it helps too if you step away from the technology part of it, right? You step away from the AD versus, whatever all of the bits and pieces are. You step away from the technology part of it and just think about what the tasks are and who's doing what when. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. Not always, but sometimes. Because sometimes what you end up with is a circumstance where you're looking at a commonality in tasks that are just using different applications.
Okay, so moving along. I also want to emphasize that this sort of workflow analysis or other types of modeling that you go through, be it use cases or whatever, is very much designed to emphasize early phase analysis rather than building and revising and finally getting it done and right in like version 3.1. The real benefit to stuff like this is it reveals a lot of the, hey, what about questions.
You mean we should do more architecture up front?
We should do more analysis and design up front. Yes.
That too.
Yes.
What are you going to do first, John?
Yeah.
Good answer.
The A word.
I have to say, after nearly a lifetime of subscribing to that view, I'm slowly coming around to accepting that there is some virtue in sometimes, because it's not easy to figure out what people are really going to do with
Absolutely.
it, to get something out there and let your users be your test team.
I mean, like we have learned from the mythical manual, however many decades ago that was. I mean, you're going to throw away at least one version. I mean, this is why we do betas. This is why we do multiple releases. There is no way, like you say, that we can get it right the first time.
There's actually a difference between a prototype and a beta.
Yeah.
And I think you're really referring to
I'm saying that you have to get stuff out,
Yeah.
call it commercial
Yes.
grade, rock solid, well thought through. I'm introducing a real business reality here, because you do have to do that sometimes because you really do not know.
Yeah. Unfortunately, if you go too far in the other direction, you end up with like the 6 or 7 month beta cycles, which is kind of a little too far, in the build it early, fix it late.
Right. Don't do another long haul,
Yes.
in other words.
It sounds a bit more like an incubation
That's-
than a development.
That's not the issue. Yes, okay, so you ship something. It's never too late, hopefully, to do this process and figure out what actually you need.
The risks get higher. and the
So
costs
the
get
concern with this, is that doing this analysis is really hard and seems to take a really long time and is really painful. The concern is that yes, it takes up a lot of time, but would you rather invest that time early in the ship cycle or really late in the ship cycle? At Microsoft, or in V2.
We know from much
Yeah.
data that the later you do it, the more expensive.
Yes. Yeah. So this is trying to move that forward in the design cycle.
Why don't you have enterprise customers who've adopted whatever you
Yes.
just rolled
Then
out?
you're in deep yard.
Well, I would argue that if you were to do the workflow analysis up front before V1, then you'd probably have better enterprise adoption later on.
Yes.
Can we actually see some workflow analysis?
Nice segue there. One last thing. Implementation agnostic. This is analysis only. Do not think about technology at this point.
That'd be really hard for us.
Grit your teeth and take a shot at it. Okay. So as an example, this is just an example here. Let's take a look at the online purchase process. We know how e-shopping works. We fire up IE, we go to Amazon.
I'm not making a joke here, but you're starting off talking about technology already.
Bear with
Go
me.
to Amazon to
I think
buy
he's
something.
framing the problem.
I am framing the problem. Yes, thank you, Winston.
I think it's the point we're thinking about, is that you're instantly starting off with a paradigm of technology. It's sort of your first rule you just violated.
Do you have something from the lumber industry maybe?
Yeah, take a look at this podium. How is it designed? Yes.
You can substitute Amazon here for a tree.
No,
Yeah.
there is an issue here, which is what was thought came back to my mind, which is, would this process have come up with the original GUI, right? There comes a point where you may have to even step back further and say, what do you actually need in terms of tools in general? What do you want from them?
Yeah.
You start saying, I
Disregard
fire
this
up and
slide
go
and just go to the next one.
Okay. So we know how e-shopping works, but let's take a look at what happens behind the scenes there. So if we look at the overall online purchase process workflow, we have kind of an overall goal for this workflow, which is where the customer wants to acquire a book in this case. We can kind of break that up into several different phases. The user identifies the need for the book. There's some supply chain stuff going on there. There's a transaction where the customer pays for the book and receives it, and possibly there's some customer support. Bear in mind,
Are we talking about the customer's perspective here or the vendor's perspective?
we are absolutely looking from the customer's perspective here.
And the customer worries about supply chains?
The customer is on one end of the supply chain. When I'm saying supply chain here, I'm not saying like from the Ingram to Amazon, but from Amazon to the customer. What's that?
Is it in stock?
Yeah, essentially that's what I'm talking about.
Analysis that Amazon would do, not that the customer would do.
Customer
Yes.
will, otherwise it goes to Barnes and Noble.
Yeah. Bear in mind that from the overall computing environment here or the overall shopping environment, this is just but one of several different workflows. So for example, there's the back-end supply stuff that happens, which does not involve the customer at all. There's the accounting stuff that happens, which does not involve the customer at all. There's the IT management stuff that happens, which does not involve the customer at all. So we can see that depending on the types of personas that play roles here, we have to break this out separately. In this case, we're just looking at the purchasing process, which is very much end user oriented, like talking about Abby, for example. So if we take a look at kind of the initial phase here, there's some user involved, our customer Abby. There's a goal. There's an overall goal for the workflow at large, but if we look at each phase of the workflow, there's kind of a sub-goal for that. In this case, the user may want to, identify the need and find the book. So as part of that, there's tasks and triggers. Now, the goal here is to find the book, and there are several tasks that are involved in that. A goal and a task is not the same thing. A goal is what you want to accomplish, and a task is how you accomplish it. So for example, not talking about this for the moment, but if we have a goal of get to work, there's different tasks that you can do to perform that goal or to accomplish that goal. So if I want to get to work, I can get in my car and sit on 520 for an hour, or I can ride the bus, or I can telecommute. So all of those different tasks can help me achieve the same goal. It's just that the context that I'm working in changes how I do it. So this is kind of getting back to what Microsoft is really good at. Goals and tasks, the difference between them is kind of where our design and development process tends to break down a lot. We are exceedingly good at developing solutions to accomplish tasks. If I want to encrypt a file, well then by golly I can encrypt a file. If I want to change the ACL on a folder, then by golly, I can change the ACL on a folder. If I want to close a port, I can close a port. All those are individual tasks. But if I have a goal of keep my system safe, not so much. We're not so good at developing something to support that on a higher level. So also bear in mind that depending on the user... Thank you. I thought it was pretty brilliant myself. Bear in mind that the tasks that are performed and the way they are performed can differ depending on who's doing it, who is the persona involved in performing the goal. So for example, if I'm searching for a book online, if Abby, the AOL mom, is searching for a book, is she going to do it differently from the way a SQL admin? Because a SQL admin is really good at typing in search strings, and Abby maybe not so much. So depending on who we're aiming solutions at, this is where we can kind of build in different technological solutions to support different types of people to potentially accomplish the same goal. So this is where it's really important to look at personas. So triggers, like Leslie said, a trigger is what kicks off a task. And also think about what kinds of decisions need to be made. In this case, Abby may want to decide, what store to use, how much she's willing to pay, things like that. Decisions and the information that are needed to make those decisions are also really important, but they're outside what we normally tend to think of because we're technology focused. messaging is important. The types of information used by different personas are really important. So think about social engineering in terms of security attacks. Social engineering and user education are kind of conceptually the same thing. They're just messaging to the user in one way or another outside the core technology. So when the user is done making decisions, when they're done performing the tasks in a particular phase, they're kind of transition to the next phase here. So if we then take a look at the supply chain, and this is the supply chain to the end customer. At this point, there's a task where the user needs to input the actual request, which means that the trigger is that the user decided to place the order from that particular store. The goal here is, for example, to convey the request. But now look at, for example, the check inventory request. Here we're kind of introducing another user or another actor here. Because it's not just the customer who's involved anymore, it's also somebody on the back end verifying that the book is in inventory. So we can see that depending on the type of workflow and the type of task, there may be more than one persona involved, which means that there may be information that needs to be handed off between them. I also want to emphasize that tasks can be analyzed to different levels of detail. So for example, here, input customer information or the request is really pretty high level. And there are subtasks that can be placed underneath there to provide more detailed information about how it's actually done. Like, input the shipping address, input the billing address, input the credit card information, things like that. So when you're doing this analysis, you don't really want to get wrapped around the axle too much. You want to do it at an appropriate level of abstraction. Also bear in mind that here we're just looking at the tasks and goals. We are not looking at the implementation. This is implementation agnostic. Here, in terms of analysis, we're just looking at what needs to be done, not technologically how it's done. We're not talking about fields on a web page versus cookies in a browser versus phone connections versus whatever. So we've talked about other users, and because there's the interactions between the different kinds of users, also bear in mind the handoffs that need to happen and the types of information and how it's supposed to be handed off. So looking at the next phase, the user gets the thing, gets the book. Abby gets the book. So her goal now here is to kind of like verify that the book meets her need and receive the item. Here, notice that tasks can be performed in potentially different orders. So here we have receives the item, inspects the item, pays afterwards. This is kind of a brick and mortar model where I bring up the book to the front desk and I make sure that it's right and then I give the money. If we're looking at online shopping, typically we pay first and then it gets shipped to us later. So depending on what actually is happening in the user's context, this stuff can boil out in different orders. Yes?
Are you being pedantic or do you have a select step missing?
You're being pedantic, and yes, it is missing.
Good catch.
This is example only and is really high level.
Everybody wants to be in his group later.
Moving right along. Let's say that there's something wrong with the book when Abby finally receives it. It got mucked up in shipping or something, and she needs to get some level of support. Here we have yet another user persona that we're introducing, which is our troubleshooting or support person. Again, Abby will need to provide information. There's handoffs, there's interaction, and all that needs to be analyzed and documented. Also bear in mind that what's happening here is actually after what we tend to think of as the end of the process. Because we tend to be, again, technology-oriented, once the transaction is completed, it's kind of done. Money was received, book was shipped, boom, we're done. However, from Abby's perspective, the overall goal is to receive a book in good condition, which means that this troubleshooting is really all part of a natural offshoot of the overall shopping experience. So when we're looking at it from the user's perspective, when we think of end to end, we need to think of what the ends really are. And so at the end, Abby is completely satisfied with her online shopping experience, and it starts back over again. So, high-level introduction to workflow modeling. What we get out of this is kind of a better mapping between users, goals, tasks, and so forth from a technology-agnostic perspective. We're only looking at tasks and goals, and we are not looking at implementation at this point. So the idea behind this is once we have this, we can then move on to an implementation phase where we design it to match the user's technological infrastructure. So for example, online shopping can be done from potentially a mobile device versus phone transactions versus the web base that we're used to, things like that. Yes?
Sort of implies that, let me just ask for clarification. The first section, I guess, figuring out the task or tasks from the needs and goals.
Yes.
My assumption would be that that is not a deterministic process. That is, that you could break down the accomplishments and goals into quite a number of different possible chains of tasks.
Yes.
So that process of selecting which chain of tasks you want to use is also kind of an important step.
Yeah. There's another user-centered design technique. Sorry, could you repeat that?
It already depends on the kind of solution you have in mind. Because the goal is buying a book, the solution can be build a bookstore. Okay? Now that's extreme, but even if buying online, different architecture will have different tasks, different parts.
Valid point. I think if I understand your point as you're saying it, you're kind of talking about a little later in the cycle when we're moving into potentially workflow re-engineering or the interaction design. This is simply looking at what the user does currently. I'm not sure if that addresses your point. There is...
I think he's right.
Okay.
If I
User does it currently because the architecture is as it is.
Okay, yes.
That's right.
Yes.
There's always a context.
Yes.
There's always some preconceived
Yes, the
notion
tasks
of
that are
what potential solutions are
Yes.
when you're contemplating what a user is going to do.
Yes.
Well, but you can track it back to a need. You could say, Abby lives in the middle of nowhere and has a need to access a deeper and broader range of books that she does not have today. Therefore, technology, as we know, the software, web-based access, addresses that need in that when you frame it from a user needs perspective.
Yes. And so even in Abby's current method of how she carries out the tasks, those are dependent upon the technology that is available to her. I mean, if Abby doesn't own a computer, she's not going to be going online from home.
That actually addresses kind of the if you will, the danger of starting with a solution and then working backward. If you start with a solution and you work backward, you may actually end up forcing your user into a set of tasks that is completely unnatural to them. And so you've got a solution, and it's a fine solution, and it works, but not for your user.
Yeah, but unfortunately, you just missed the point. His point was they're already pre-existing bookstores, so we try to emulate the online experience off of something previously done to give them context.
Yes.
The existing bookstore has a workflow that we know quite well.
Which we use as a model.
Which we use as a model.
Right.
When you track that example into a non-purchasing kind of an example, it starts to break down a little more because we know the workflow less well.
Also, bear in mind that this example...
We do this a lot of times. We actually say, okay, try and get the user experience up to speed faster. We try to find something that they previously done, to leapfrog them into this new paradigm.
Right, and sometimes those metaphors work and sometimes they don't.
Right, but it's very hard not to look for that when you're starting to look at your solution.
Yes. The thing is, we don't want to go there automatically.
Yeah, that's why we do the analysis part of it.
Yeah.
It helps us to validate the metaphors.
Yeah. Also bear in mind that this example here is really short, kind of high level. There's other aspects to this, like workflow reengineering, contextual inquiry, things like that. Yes.
It's a very familiar scenario.
Yes.
Right? Everybody's familiar with buying books one way or another. When you come to more esoteric things like how do you manage an enterprise network, well,
It gets a little harder.
It's been done before,
Yeah.
but it's never been done well before.
Yes.
Right, but that's the point I was getting at, is that when you have somewhat less known, I mean, you sort of imply that, well, we know how to buy a book, and now if we just do the analysis, we'll figure out the sequence of tasks involved. Whereas in many cases, the real spade work is involved in figuring out what sequence of tasks you actually want the user to perform in order to accomplish the goal, and that's
Or what they really perform. Right? If you
what
look
they
at
might perform
Yeah.
in a
if you
completely
look at
new
what they're
scenario.
doing now, though, instead of starting with a solution, if you look at what they do now and you build a solution based on that set of tasks, then the solution that you
That's right.
end up with
For better or
works
worse.
better for your users.
or not.
Yeah, or not.
They could be very dissatisfied with the set of tasks they have now, and they would like something
Which is
completely
exactly
different.
my example of managing an enterprise network.
Yes. This is kind of getting
It's
into...
done very badly today. No
Yeah.
one wants to do it that way anymore.
Right.
They want a new way of doing it.
Yeah, this is getting to the workflow reengineering aspect of it. This is kind of,
Okay,
what
but-
I showed you here is kind of like the first half. The reengineering falls out of this. This looks at the set of tasks that are performed now, and then based on that, you post lots of stickies up on the wall and kind of figure out the flow between them and kind of decide on new flows and new tasks. And that's really hard, granted, absolutely.
So how would this apply to something that's never been done before? Let's say a user wants to verify that they can trust their computer. There is no workflow for that because users don't do that.
Right.
So how do you do user-centered design? How do you
This is the
build
point.
workflow around this?
This is why in security, why security has had this problem. In the past, users have done nothing in each one of these cases, and so the assumption is, well, the next workflow has to be nothing, right? That's how we get into this idea of those should all be
This is kind of where we get into...
But how do you apply this, though? You work from a defined scenario. How do you work when there is no defined scenario to
Yeah.
design the workflow around? How do
Yeah,
you
this
get
is where
workflow?
creativity comes in, and this is where we do stuff like more contextual user analysis and persona building. We look at the characteristics of personas, see their levels of knowledge, how they're able to deal with new concepts like unknown security concepts that they may not have seen before, and then approach it from that perspective. We can't obviously build a workflow for something that doesn't exist, but we can kind of infer that from our knowledge of the users.
Right, because one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that this helps you get over trial and error. And I would say that scenario is inherently trial and error. But I'm just trying to get an idea of how you would apply this to that scenario.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
a hard scenario.
personas and workflow are kind of go hand in hand in this.
So the other thing is, though, in that particular scenario, I mean, what you're doing is you're kind of anthropomorphizing something in a new way for the user, right? You're asking them to apply something that they do with people to a thing.
Presumably.
And so I mean, when you watch users, when you take a look at how they work with their computer already, you may find that they already do trust their computer, but they don't realize that that's what they're doing. Or you may find that there are trust analogies that they already have with other people that you can then come back and apply to your computer.
Yeah, I don't want to get wrapped up in the example that I use. It's just, I think this is interesting, and I understand it from a scenario that already exists in the physical world, or that users already do on a computer, is trying to get away from trial and error with something that users don't do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that workflow analysis is the be-all and end-all of user research.
I think to add to it, we do a trial and error in an expensive way, right? We build it into code. We take all the manpower to get there to do that. And this is kind of a way to model and focus earlier, so therefore you're saving costs by doing the trial and error in a more investigative way than like building the whole process.
How do you
Okay.
say if this is a V1 product with a new idea, okay, there's nothing to look back at. Okay, how do you know that it's right?
Well-
In V2, you will go to your customer, you will ask for feedback, you will see how they use it, you will think about it. In V1,
Yeah. This is why God invented prototypes.
Yeah, there's always a risk. right? You're always inherently taking a risk with a V1 product. And there's always a point where there's a percentage of guessing. That's just kind of the nature of what it is.
Most PCs today will tell you, as you said earlier, Leslie, is you say, I have a piece of technology, and I think it's great for this market. People who used to have to do X by hand are now going to do it this way. Or I'm going to take out these other 5, 6 steps they have to do and make it all one, and it's going to be wonderful. Most VCs saying, you want how many millions from me? So tell me, how is this really going to work? Show me how many people they got rid of, because now you have this piece of technology. Show me exactly how it's going to walk through, considering that you told me your top 3 to 5 customers are going to be X in your first release. You know, to make you walk through all that. And I think that kind of workflow, even for a V1, is extremely beneficial, because I think when you get to a big company, you kind of lose that, gee, you have to do all that work if you're a startup. Why shouldn't we be doing some of that work here?
Okay. So, speaking of doing workflow analysis,
There should be an answer.
yeah, I mean, this is why we do rounds of prototyping. I mean, there are forms of user research, from paper-based prototyping to more involved prototyping that we can just put in front of users and get some level of feedback. Granted, it's not the level that we can get from a full-blown released product, but it helps. So let's take a look at how we might apply workflow analysis to some aspect of security, where we have, for example, Abby, who wants to keep her files safe. So what are some of the things that we might need to think of? What is the user workflow? Does it matter where Abby is geographically? Why does the user need to see the seams here? Why does the technology and the tasks to use the technology, where or when do they need to be exposed to Abby?
Are you talking about Abby at home or Abby at work?
At this point, I'm kind of going to be a little vague here. Why do you ask?
Because it makes a difference. Okay. If you look at the typical knowledge worker, right, and then if you look at the Abby who's using her home computer kind of scenarios.
Yeah, but Abby is a persona that's not meant to be an IW persona. She's primarily meant to be a home.
Because I've seen her bantied about as IW personas lots of ways.
No, so wrong. She's a soccer stay-at-home mom. She works a part-time job. She's nobody in our IW space.
Okay.
Stay-at-home soccer mom who works part-time in a real estate.
Well, in Microsoft real estate, same thing.
Take a look at the construction going on.
It's true, and now I can say admins, architects, they're all the same. I always suspected that was true.
Yeah, so kind of the point here is personas are not something that you just kind of apply willy-nilly to workflow, as you just pointed out here. Personas in large part are actually derived from workflow. You look at how different people do different things, and then you see the common characteristics of people who kind of cluster into different behavioral patterns, and you call that a persona.
Right. I think one of the challenges is that we tend to look at the workflow analysis and the user-based analysis as like the source of design. But it is a source of design, but it's not a source of our strategy. And when you try to achieve something, you define what are the boundaries of the things that you don't want to change. For example, i.e. your first example, and a book. That's a technology as well. These are the things that I don't want to change. You can use these when you describe your user workflows. You don't describe the things that you actually want to replace or develop. So scoping is strategy, and it comes before you develop the user the user scenarios. And one of the question about the personas, if it helps you differentiate between the people, between Abby at work and Abby at home. If it doesn't help, you don't.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, and I apologize if I kind of miscommunicate here. Workflow analysis is not the be-all, end-all of design. It is another tool in toolbox that historically has not been used all that much in this space. All right. So, Carrie, can I have your assistance here?
Sure. Is that lovely assistant, Carrie?
Yes. Lots of good questions about workflow analysis and security. So we're going to give you an example to take a look at workflow analysis and security. Leslie, can you give a hand? Carrie and Leslie are going to be handing out some blank copies of a roughly equivalent table, and I'd like you to take a few minutes and go through an exercise. How might you model the workflow analysis for, keep my files safe? Leslie talked about EFS before. Think of EFS as a starting point for this exercise. Bear in mind that since we're a technology-based company, there are plenty of other technologies that may or may not play a role here. So
we're starting using EFS as a technology or as a starting point, and then aren't we sort of putting a technology for a solution? So probably don't have yet?
Which is something you were advocating against us doing?
The reason I'm saying use EFS as a starting point is, Leslie talked about EFS in terms of, keep my files safe. Using EFS as a starting point may or may not be the best solution. Yes. Okay, so we're going to give you a few minutes. You have pens, you have Post-its, you can scribble directly on this if you want, do whatever you want. Bear in mind, keep this implementation agnostic. Yeah.
So we've got some, I just want to address.
Okay. If you need some thoughts on how to start here, think of the overall goal of whomever this persona is. You may want to use Abby as the persona here. Think of the overall goal for Abby keeping her files safe. Each task is going to be performed by one or more personas. The user is going to need different types of information in order to perform the tasks. So see if you can fill out those pieces and fill in the personas, tasks, owners, and so forth. I received a news announcement
Anybody else do that? My girlfriend, beauty shop, her computer crashed and lost all her pictures. Maybe she doesn't. We don't have that. I said optional. Why would anybody we're thinking about
We shouldn't do it. Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely
So that's not
That's sort of what it's for. So like buying a book. Are there different
And you know what, and that's actually one of the most
Well, so I'm just pointing out here, so I have a large.
Folks, 5 minutes. Think fast.
Not only that, but she doesn't even know how
So I moved back to before that walked in and I just
One more minute. If you're going to write stuff down, do it now.
Well, okay, so.
Yeah, for 90 days, and then you go on page, and then you get the
Okay, folks, why don't we wrap this up here? All right, go off and design it and build it now. Okay, folks, eyes up here. Who here has done a particularly good job? Who here has only one column filled out? Yeah. Okay. Who's done a good job? Raise your hands. Okay. All right. If you've done a good job, bring up your poster, tape it up, and talk us through it.
If you've given us PowerPoint slides, we wouldn't
Oh,
have this.
come on up.
The PM is going to get on.
I did not realize.
So what am I supposed to present?
Walk us through it.
Walk us through. All right. Okay, so we chose.
Is it on standby there?
Talk. Yeah, go. Just hold it closer to you.
All right. We chose the persona of Abby to go through this process of keeping her files safe. So there's some time that we spent discussing about what is the set of things that constitutes her files, what is the set of things that, and what does keeping it safe mean? And the way we scoped it was we basically said that files really means her data. So it does not mean things like files in the operating system, files in the disk, but it really just means the set of personal data that she owns, creates, manages, deals with, things of that sort. And keeping it safe basically meant, so the way we kind of defined keeping it safe was to say that Abby gets to decide who she wants to have access to this data, and it's only that set of folks that she gives and grants access to and authorizes has access to that data. So with that, basically we created 4 workflow segments. And the first was around data creation or document creation. And Then the second was, once the data, the document was created, how the process by which she tagged it to say, yes, this was a piece of data that I actually wanted to protect and keep safe, or not, as appropriate. And then the third segment to actually go and grant the set of folks the appropriate level of access. And then the last one was to kind of go through the overall life cycle and make sure that the data was kept secure, even through backup and restoring or destroying the data and things of that sort. More level of detail?
So what are the tasks?
What tasks did you have in there?
So the first task was basically, like in terms of data organization. So creating a new document was one task. A second task in the document creation part of it was, in the case when you have an existing document, so finding the existing document was a task. In tagging and securing the data, there was one task to basically say determining who's the set of folks who should have that access was a task. And then based on that list, to actually go and determine the appropriate security measures. So determining whether or not, so this was kind of around the definition of what is the definition of safety. Like, is it just public to everybody, or is it just to Abby herself, or to just Abby and her husband, or Abby and her husband and her kids, etc.
So you envision a dialog box popping up each time she creates any new content. It says default permissions, or
no, actually, we envision this is just so we focus purely on user experience. So we did not really think about UI at all.
How does she name the people that can access the data?
Not something we thought we'd spend a lot of time on.
Okay, we should go next.
Okay, go ahead.
Excellent, bring it up.
Bring it up.
So I think that one of the things that we're hearing here.
No.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. If you want to finish, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, well, there's not a whole lot more, but I mean, basically, the rest of it is just really, additional tasks around. So what do we have here? Right. So, there was around granting the actual access. So, determining. Once you've granted the access, making sure that only authorized users can access the files. Making sure that there's a task to basically confirming that that a hacker could not access the file. So just kind of validating those kind of scenarios. Yeah, I mean, and that's basically it.
Excellent, thank you.
All right. Come on up.
I think we should introduce the group
It's very simple.
Members and tell where they're from too again.
Okay.
Okay, I'll actually be really quick, I think. So, what, you want introductions?
Well, I'm from research and
Okay. I'm Josh Benelow.
Josh, the mic goes here.
I'm Josh Benelow. I'm from research. Yeah. Charlie Kaufman and Slava Kavska are the other two members of the group. We started at exactly the same very high-level question of, we looked at Abby's goal, keep my data safe. Well, we actually wound up sort of with a dialog box that looked something like, do you want to keep your data safe? Yes, no. And realized that we realized that this dialog box was kind of unnecessary. So we broke it a little further into the problem and realized that it is about figuring out what data you want to share with who, under what circumstances. And that basically boiled down to two primary tasks, or subtasks, I guess, here. Identifying people and identifying data.
So that says Abby is clairvoyant, I think. Because she knows all the future people that she wants to send data.
No, the basic assumption is you start off with a closed machine. This is my machine, my data. Nobody else gets to see my data.
And then the real problems involve sharing with applications, sharing with family members. Yep.
Is it really your computer, or is it your daughter who's trying to save it on your computer? Does she have the right to exclude you from seeing the content?
When I start off, it's my machine, and then I can grant other people access to do other things. So, go.
Machine could be an online. Yeah, it could be rightly running under Google.
Ultimately, it certainly can be, but anyway, the primary direction we went was figuring out how to specify identity and data. And we realized that there is a common metaphor which people use all the time where they identify individuals or other entities and data, and that's email. They will open a new email and say, these are the people I want to get it, and here are some attachments, here are some things that are going to that person or that set of people or that group. So our first pass at this is to use that email metaphor as a way that might not actually be email, but it looks the same, it feels the same, and it's a way of saying, okay, these things, and it might be broader than attachments, it might be directories or shares of some sort, go to these people. And then there are lots of little details that may come about beyond that in, do we want it a read-only, or do we want to share that's two-way writable and whatnot. Lots of things left to be done. We didn't quite solve all the world's problems in 15 minutes, but there's our start.
That's actually really helpful. So what we saw, go for it. Come on up. Bring it up. Bring it up. Sure, come on.
That's what's the best.
No, it's not that different. I mean, I see a lot of similarities, but so I'm not sure it's worth it.
So how many people had something that was similar? Yeah, yeah. It actually sounded quite similar to when I was walking around, I heard a lot of similarities. And one of the things that I liked in this one that we saw here was that it was really agnostic to the implementation, right? There was no dialog box. There was no, how are we implementing this? There wasn't anything like that.
Implementation, because it started off with the assumption that we're working with files and data.
That was the one part that was not agnostic. You're right, because my stuff can be almost anything.
And this is where we sort of, created 15, 17 posters.
Do you want to bring it up?
I don't know if it's worth bringing up. It's very similar to where I think everybody else ends up with. Is that we have lots of questions in terms of what does safe actually mean and what is the problem we're actually trying to solve. And it seemed like, with the first bullet there, using EFS as a starting point was a false place to start from, because it makes a lot of assumptions about the environment that the user is in and what the user understands. And in fact, I would arguably, Abby is completely the wrong persona to even start with the word files up there. Because probably, if my wife and kids aren't an example, they have no idea what the hell files are.
Excellent, yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Abby doesn't know what a file is, doesn't know what a folder is. She knows that she puts stuff in there, that it's there. And the notion of safe was also, the question was basically geared towards encrypting it, right? And likely Abby figured out that she has an exposure because she was at the soccer game and the other mom said, oh my God, I lost all my photos because my disk crashed, right? That's probably more likely safety that she has in mind versus some evil person's going to get access to my kid's birthday pictures.
I think that's identifying user need. I think this was a great consumable project for everybody to talk about. But really, this workflow is like a sub-workflow to the larger, how does Abby keep stuff safe? And what does that mean to her? And I think these guys back here are like identifying those questions. That was a huge part of this workshop, was to get to thinking about it from that larger perspective of, is Abby really going to ever think at this granular level of securing data at a file level or a folder level? The odds are not.
Well, actually, you're missing a whole point. People actually take documents and put them in safes or in safety deposit boxes and filing cabinets all the time. They don't just leave them on the coffee table so they show it to their friends your bank statement.
Well, so,
they
but
do
does
this.
she want to encrypt it? I mean, how does she want
So
to
what she'll do
manage
is she'll print it out, put it in the
safety?
safe in the kitchen. Right.
Right, how does she want to make it?
Put it in the safe
I don't
deposit
understand
box.
that.
It's like the State Department, when they say they go to destroy a document, it's 2 armed guards, they watch the document burn. And we go, well, it was existed on a Word document. It said, we print it, store it as a printed document, and when we get rid of it, 2 armed guards escort the guy down to the incinerator and then watch it burn. It's like, okay.
So I think that the thing that you just talked about there is that you're right. That's the sub-process, right? And for Abby, keeping my stuff safe as the goal, stuff isn't even just documents, right? Stuff is my TV. Stuff is my kid's retainer. Stuff is the keys to my car. Her kids, right? Stuff is a lot of different things. And so what we do is we start looking at what all those different things are, and then we start breaking down into subcategories of what possible other solutions might there be, or what possible other workflows. So if she's looking at her tax returns, what does she do? We had a conversation here that went along the lines of, my husband lost my tax returns down the back of my desk. Is it safe? Yeah. Is it helpful? No. I can't get to it. There are other things like that where those are workflow examples that what would I do maybe to make that different? Well, maybe what I learned from that is that the hard copy isn't the only copy I should have. So then if I do keep a file on my computer, what does that mean? And so you start working through that way. Is EFS the right thing for Abby? I don't think so. That's a personal opinion, but I don't think so. You can encrypt your kids, yeah. There you go. I'd go with that, yeah. I don't think anybody will argue with that.
The other problem is, how do I get it from other places? How do I get it from my mobile device? Right?
Yeah.
How do I get it from another kiosk on the same network?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
EFS potentially is a valid solution.
Well, for those, yes. And if
for
you,
Abby, who's probably not advanced user or business oriented, we're talking about Abby, so it's identifying the
You
appropriate.
forget, but if I'm with sheep, she will.
that's a round hole, dang it. We're going to make her fit there. So, okay, we had a little thing where we presented some findings, and this was really cool. I really enjoyed watching you work through it. This isn't the end. Once we go through this, we had a conversation about this before, which is re-engineering, right? This isn't the end. Once we've gone through this once and we've made some choices and we've found some things out and we've built some software based on this, ultimately, we're a software company, that's our goal, right? We don't make kid-safe programs necessarily. We're a software company. And so ultimately, we're looking to create the right software for the right people to meet their needs. And so once we've done that, then what we do is we evaluate what we've done. Like you were saying, V2, you try harder to get it right again the next time, or better the next time, that kind of thing. But if you keep reevaluating the workflow, surprises will pop up. Like we found with this rekeying example in EFS that we thought was being done by administrators and is actually being done by knowledge workers, theoretically. This is actually the kind of thing that happens when you keep going in the process.
Also bear in mind that as you move along, you're going to find that the environment itself is changing. Because especially as we're seeing greater emphasis on, the internet in the consumer space and mobile devices in the consumer space and mobile devices moving into the enterprise space, we see that the context that the users perform their tasks in and achieve their needs in itself changes, which means that as those capabilities change, we have to reevaluate our product offerings.
So what we'd like to know from you now that we've kind of gone through this process and you've been very good sports about the big pieces of paper and everything like that, what we'd like to know from you is what challenges do we face at Microsoft with implementing this? I mean, we've talked a little bit about that. You were saying this is maybe not the audience that's optimal. I don't know if I agree with that. I think that this is actually exactly a good audience to start with. This isn't the only one, But I think that this is a really good audience to start with. You guys are key influencers in your groups, and you people are also key builders. You come in at exactly the right time. And so this is, from my perspective at least, completely the correct place to begin. But we'd like to also hear from you. So you tell us. Anybody have any comments?
I suggest two things. You're right. I was probably overstating it when we said this is the right audience. But certainly the more important audience are the business decision makers, right? Ultimately, the decisions on what feature makes it and what doesn't is a POM or a GM or a VP or somebody like that, right? We have considerable influence, but that is really a more important.
Kadra, you're missing a point though.
Where
we do have impact is what does it mean to implement it? Like, do we prompt for a dialog box every time somebody wants to read an encrypted piece of email, or can they enter the PIN once and we can read from then on? Right? The security bit heads and us go, you know what? Security, so you have to enter your PIN each time. The user experience is terrible.
Well, that's not true.
And that's controlled by us.
I certainly don't. So I don't think it's I will not agree with the generalization that security heads go overboard on wanting to prompt for a PIN every time, the key is used or something. It is probably true. It is probably true that the technical community does not have as good an appreciation of the business goals and challenges and risks, right? I will accept that. It is also true that the business community in the company does not have a good appreciation for what is technologically feasible, what can be done, etc., right? So some amount of that reconciliation has to happen.
I completely agree. You're absolutely right. I can't count the number of times that I've gone to developers and said, so all we need is like this magic. Can you do the magic? Or I've gone to architects and said, so we've got this problem that we need to solve, and you just have to put it in there. And you're absolutely right. There has to be some sort of a reconciliation, some sort of a communication. One of the nice things about this kind of user-centered modeling is that it gives us a common language. Right? There are many possible common languages out there. This is one. And if we're doing user-centered modeling inside our organizations, we end up with a number of benefits, one of which is that we have a common language that we can speak. Another one is that we end up with a more rationalized product that ultimately is less expensive to build. So there are business considerations and potentially technical considerations in there too. I can't think of any one person who builds something and then is thrilled about building it all over again.
Because this exercise is actually, I think, typical of the problem that we often encounter and what leads us to the kinds of solutions that we end up building. Because the problem was expressed in such a way that it leads you to a particular implementation,
right,
and a particular hammer and nail, essentially, in order to solve it. And when we sat here and started talking about this, we really were looking at trying to understand the broad parse the problem as a broader question, and then try to understand what problems we're really solving. And I think that we get caught in that trap a lot. And I see that all the time.
Yeah.
In that we don't really, by the time the feature gets nailed down, it's nailed down to the point that we're not that it leads itself to a particular implementation or particular design. And in fact, really, we need to be in the process much earlier so that we can look at the problem more holistically and say, okay, so what do you really mean by safe? And safe from what? And then to try to understand, because arguably this whole thing could be solved by something that is a completely so-called security technology solution, right? Yeah, if safe is defined as recoverable, it means that it just needs to be saved offline someplace, and it has nothing to do with encryption. It has nothing to do with signatures.
Right. Agreed. Yes.
Usability is not a feature. It is a characteristic of a product.
What's security? I would argue that.
Just like security. Right?
I would argue that.
I agree with
I
that.
think
I don't think
usability is a
security
huge
is a feature.
feature.
I think usability is a necessary attribute of a product. Right. And this is just a way of arriving at what is the best necessary attribute.
The way in which usability is not a feature is it's not something you separately sell, and it cuts across all of the rest of the features in much the same way that with security things, right? I mean, having these two things usable and that other half not means you have an unusable product. Not you've got a usability feature and someone came along and added the later. It's a feature in the marketing perspective of a bullet point on the box when compared to other products in the field. It's a feature of the product. It's usable and you can measure against that.
Let me clarify something because I just want to make sure you didn't misunderstand what I was saying. When I talked about feature, I wasn't referring to usability as a feature. I was referring to this particular example, which specifies a product feature, and the features that I'm talking about are product features that we often get later in the cycle, where by the time it gets down to the architecture and design phase, the product feature is specified about securing a file in a particular kind of fashion. And what my point was is that we need to be in the process at the point that somebody said that Abby needs to keep this safe, so that we can better parse the problem to then determine how we arrive at the solution. Because otherwise, I think we get led into
solutions rather than solving problems.
Exactly.
A solution off in search of a problem.
Right. So please don't misunderstand me. I do not think usability is a feature. Okay.
So you actually said several things that I think are really, really important. One is where it comes in the cycle, right? You were saying that it often comes so far into the cycle that you're sitting there and you're going, okay, we have a round hole. Where's my round peg? And I think that that's actually a key, is if you can get this kind of process earlier on in the cycle, then it has a much better chance of having a positive impact on your eventual product, whatever that happens to be. I think that's completely a key thing. And if there's one thing that I'd like everybody to take away, it's please involve UX people earlier on in the cycle, in the planning part of it. I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah.
What you're building. Yeah.
So,
back to my point I raised earlier. This exercise, I don't think has to do with security. This is a user experience exercise. I could repeat the same exact exercise and come up with the exact same findings.
I have a better scenario for you, which is today you get to auto provision your group, your distribution list through auto group. So that's an internal tool only for Microsoft to offload our IT people. Our customers can't do this, and they're screaming for, I have to go manage everybody's distribution list. I'd like to provision them via auto group. Why don't we sell auto group? And that's the pain that we're running in with our products, is that the IT trial are trying to do the self-hosting, the self-maintenance, and it's things like auto group that people are screaming at.
Sure, I get it, but my point I'm going to make is something different, which is really to say that at the end of the day, with any product, early on, you define your business requirements, and from your business requirements, you think about personas, you think about scenarios. The moment you have those scenarios, independent of security or not, is when you want to go and design a user experience. And to me, that's the key takeaway from me, at least, which is that it's not a revolutionary takeaway.
Right.
In some sense, it's actually
it's a well-known thing. Yes.
It has been neglected, particularly in the area of security, because, as I said, security has been ignored for one thing. Secondly, it's been considered a security nerd issue only. Everybody else doesn't want to deal with it, and so it's been neglected in terms of the user experience. And the result is that we have security. The situation we have now with the security user experience. And secondly, it's worth going back and thinking about security problems from this perspective, precisely because it's been so neglected.
Security problems, including privacy.
So, and on that note, we're going to stop. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to let you know that we do have some more information. If you go to TCN, you'll find some more information. I got a lot of great feedback today about how maybe to do things differently, that kind of thing. If you have any more, there's an alias there. Please feel free to send information to the alias or to Jen Sisti, and she would be happy to pass it on. I'd love to see some discussions happen on the alias, and I'd love to be part of that. If you have any questions, if you would like us to talk with your groups, if you would like us to talk with you, we're completely available. I'd love to talk with you more. Anything that we can do to help, we're more than happy to help out. And thank you all for coming today. That was 2 hours out of your day, and I appreciate it. Thank you.